So, you're thinking about maybe picking up No Longer Human. This book, man, it's Osamu Dazai.
Yeah.
And it's one of those that really seems to get people talking.
It does, yeah.
Love it or hate it kind of thing. And that's why we're here. We're going to lay it all out, all the good, all the bad, so you can figure out if this one's for you.
Absolutely.
We'll hit the style, what Dazai is doing with the writing. We'll dig into the content. Some pretty heavy stuff in there, by the way. And we'll even see how it stacks up against some other books you might know.
Sounds good.
All in, what, like 9 minutes?
9 minutes, yep.
So by the time we're done, you'll know, No Longer Human, to read or not to read. That is the question.
I think what really grabs you about this book is that it just, I don't know, it gets under your skin. Even though, I mean, think about it. This was written way back in 1948.
Wow.
But it's still considered like a classic, like the classic of Japanese literature. And there's a reason for that,
I mean, yeah, it makes you wonder why it stuck around so long.
It's the themes. Like the way it tackles alienation and depression, it's raw. You don't get that a lot, And it still hits people today, the way Dazai just puts it out there.
Okay. Powerful stuff. I get it. But let's say someone's never really, dipped their toes into Japanese literature. What makes this one No Longer Human? What makes it different? What's the thing that's going to hook them?
It's the main character, definitely, Yozo. He's narrating his own, his own descent into this, despair.
Okay.
But, and this is what gets me, he's not just, sitting there taking it. He's putting on this whole act like a clown, trying to fit in when he feels totally, completely alienated from everyone.
Hold on. So it's not just all doom and gloom. There's this performance element to it.
Yeah.
He's playing a role.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that something you see a lot in Japanese literature, this whole masks and hidden identities thing?
Oh, yeah. It comes up a lot, for sure, especially in the stuff written after the war. Yeah, I remember Japan went through a lot back then, World War II, massive changes, societal upheaval, everything's crumbling. Traditional values are out the window.
Right.
And then you have all these Western ideas flooding in. It was a time of just massive disillusionment and uncertainty. No one knew what the future held.
So you're telling me Yozo's personal meltdown is happening, right? Is the whole country's kind of going through its own meltdown?
Exactly.
That's heavy. But am I right that the book is kind of mostly in his head, focused on what he's thinking and feeling? What about the plot? Is there even a story, or is it just introspection central?
It's definitely a slow burn, no doubt about that. It's much more about Yozo, about how he develops as a character, than some big, crazy plot. Think of it like we're getting this deep dive into his psyche, his mind. We're seeing the whole world through his eyes, feeling his anxieties, his self-loathing, all that. And then there's all these attempts to connect with people, but they go wrong. They go terribly wrong.
Not exactly a page turner, huh? No big twists and turns, no car chases.
Not really, no.
But I guess if you're someone who likes, I don't know, character studies, if you want to get inside someone's head, this could be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. If you've read, Notes from Underground by Dostoyevsky or The Stranger by Camus, you'd see some interesting similarities, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Same kind of vibe. Those protagonists, they're alienated, They don't fit in.
But you were saying Yozo, he's actually trying to fit in, right? Doesn't that make him different?
You're picking up on it. That's what makes him so interesting. He wants to be accepted, but he just keeps messing it up.
Ah, I see.
His whole clown thing, it's self-destructive, just makes him more isolated in the end.
So we've got a troubled guy in a troubled world.
Mm.
And it sounds like the writing's pretty intense, too. But I noticed the critique actually praised the translation.
Oh, yeah, the translation.
What makes it so special?
It's Donald Keene. He's the gold standard for translating Dazai. Dazai's prose is it's poetic, very emotionally charged. But Keene, he just nails it. You still get that feeling, that unique voice, even though it's a translation.
That's good, at least. So even if the content's heavy, the writing's beautiful. But I'm curious, what about the content itself? We've talked about depression, alienation, all that. Is it just a depressing book to read?
It's not exactly cheerful, no. Dazai doesn't shy away from the tough stuff, the reality of mental illness. But the book's power, I think, comes from its honesty.
Yeah.
It's like you're looking right into the heart of despair. It makes you ask yourself, what does it even mean to be human?
Sounds both disturbing and thought-provoking. But for someone who's maybe dealing with their own mental health stuff, could it be a bit much? Too intense, maybe triggering?
It's a good question. And honestly, for someone in a vulnerable place, it might be best to be careful. Maybe skip it altogether. There's some really graphic descriptions of depression, even suicidal thoughts. It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah.
Always good to know what you're getting into. But for someone who's up for the challenge, what makes No Longer Human worth it?
Well, for starters, there's the history of it all. It's a snapshot of Japan right after the war, a society in total upheaval, trying to figure out what comes next. It's a period that doesn't get a lot of attention, and Dazai captures it so well.
So for history buffs, anyone interested in Japanese culture, that's a big plus.
Yeah.
What about its lasting impact, though? Why do you think this book still speaks to people today after all these years?
The themes, I think, they're universal. This feeling of alienation, being isolated, searching for connection. Everyone goes through that on some level. Doesn't matter where you're from or what year it is.
Yeah, I see that. So we've got beautiful writing, a unique historical perspective, and themes that are, like, timeless. But it's also dark, slow-paced, and potentially triggering. Sounds complicated.
It's definitely complex. And you know what? We've only scratched the surface. Next time, we'll really dive into the specifics.
Okay.
Like how Dazai develops the characters and all the literary tools he uses to create this really powerful impact. Plus, we'll compare it to some other books that touch on similar themes so you can see where it fits in the big picture.
Sounds like a plan.
Welcome back. So let's get back into No Longer Human and see what makes this thing tick. We were talking about Yozo and that whole clown persona thing. What's so interesting about that for you?
I guess, like, it seems he's kind of trapped in this performance, you know?
Right.
Like, he's trying so hard to please everybody, be what they want, but it's almost like it just pushes everyone away.
Exactly. And that's how Dazai uses this whole clown thing. It's like a critique of societal expectations.
Mhm.
And especially in Japan after the war.
Yeah.
Remember we were talking about that sense of like disillusionment.
Yeah.
Well, that's where the clowning comes in for Yozo. It's his way of dealing with it, like a defense mechanism
Yeah.
against a world that just feels, I don't know, absurd, meaningless even.
So it's not just, like, Yozo's personal struggles then.
Right.
It's like a commentary on the whole society.
Yeah.
Which I guess makes it even more relevant, right? Like, we all feel that pressure sometimes to fit in, put on a happy face, even when things are rough.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the comparison to, say, convenience store woman, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because even though that one's set in modern day Japan, they both kind of explore the same idea, you know, that feeling of being an outsider, not belonging.
Right, like Keiko. She finds comfort in her job at the convenience store. It's like her way of dealing with the world. But Yozo's, well, his way is a lot darker.
A lot darker, yeah. And part of that is the historical context. I mean, post-war Japan, everything was upside down. It was a time of huge upheaval. Think about it. The whole country is trying to rebuild. Physically, yeah, but psychologically, too. There's this sense of loss, this, like, shattered illusions. It's everywhere.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see why it's so bleak. It's like Yozo's problems, they're reflecting the problems of the whole country.
Exactly.
But the critique mentions some pretty disturbing stuff, like the scene with Yozo's wife. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, that scene, it's rough. It's one of the most unsettling parts of the book, for sure. Basically, Yozo, he sees his wife being assaulted.
Oh, wow.
And instead of, doing something, helping her, he just freezes.
He does nothing.
Nothing. He's completely overwhelmed by his own feelings, like inadequacy and shame.
So he's just constantly sabotaging himself.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pushing people away, even the people who are trying to help him. Is that, like, on purpose? Do you think that's what Dazai was going for?
I think so. I don't think he was trying to make Yozo likable, In fact, he can be pretty unlikable at times. But that's what makes him so interesting. Like, he forces us to look at the dark side of human nature, the ways we hurt ourselves and the people we love.
So it's not a feel-good story, that's for sure. But for a reader who's ready for that, for something heavy, what makes this whole dark side exploration worthwhile?
It's insightful, like really insightful. Dazai just gets it. Depression, alienation, he captures those things with a rawness and an honesty that's hard to find. He doesn't sugarcoat anything.
So even though it's bleak, there's this, like, sense of truth.
Exactly. It feels real. And I think that's why it resonates with people even now. We all have those dark moments, right? Times when we feel lost, disconnected. And that's what No Longer Human speaks to, that universal experience.
I get it. But the critique also mentions some pretty heavy comparisons, like Dostoyevsky, Camus. Is No Longer Human really on that level?
Well, it's often lumped in with existentialist literature, and for good reason. Like the themes in Notes from Underground or The Stranger, they're there in No Longer Human, too. Absurdity, alienation, trying to find meaning in a world that feels meaningless.
Okay, but those books, they're known for being pretty, how do I put it, dense, like full of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Is No Longer Human that much of a challenge to read?
It's challenging, yeah, but in a different way. It's not so much about like abstract ideas and philosophy. It's more about the feeling, the raw emotional experience of, I don't know, of being human. Or in this case, feeling like you're no longer human.
I'm starting to see why this book is so, I don't know, divisive. It's not for everyone, but for the right person, it could be a powerful read.
Exactly. And you know what? We're just getting started. Next time, we wrap it all up, give you the final verdict.
Okay.
Plus, we'll talk about the impact it's had and what it might have to say about our world, our society today.
Sounds good. All right, so we've talked a lot about this book, but for someone who's still on the fence about No Longer Human, what's the bottom line? Like, would you actually recommend it?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I think it depends what you're looking for as a reader. If you want like a fast-paced, action-packed kind of story, this one might not be it. But if you're more into character-driven stories, if you like exploring those like really deep parts of the human psyche, then yeah, No Longer Human could be a good fit.
Okay, so not exactly a light read, but there's a lot to think about. Who do you think would really get something out of this book?
Anyone who's interested in Japanese literature, for
Yeah.
sure, especially the stuff written after the war, it gives you this like inside look at that period, all the changes and the anxieties people were feeling.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess anyone interested in mental illness, too, although maybe with a warning label.
Oh, definitely. Dazai doesn't hold back, you know? You see depression, alienation, it's all laid bare. But yeah, it's intense. If someone's struggling with those things themselves, it might be best to steer clear.
Yeah, probably a good call. Better safe than sorry. What about, like, readers who just enjoy a challenge? The kind of people who like a book that really makes them think.
This is it. This is the one. No Longer Human is thought-provoking, sure, but it's also, well, sometimes it's downright disturbing. But it's beautifully written, and it stays with you. It might even, I don't know, change the way you think about what it means to be human.
Okay, that's a pretty strong endorsement. But for someone who's still not sure, what would you say is, like, the thing that makes No Longer Human worth reading?
For me, it's that feeling of alienation that Dazai captures so well. Like you're fundamentally different. Like you just don't connect with anyone else. It's a feeling we all have sometimes, no matter where we're from or what time period. It goes beyond all that.
Right.
It's just human.
So even though it was written, what, like 70 years ago,
More, yeah.
it still speaks to us today. It's about more than just Yozo and his problems. It's about all of us trying to find meaning, trying to connect with each other.
Exactly. You know, the book ends on kind of an ambiguous note. Like, we don't really know what happens to Yozo. But the question Dazai leaves us with is, I think, even bigger. It's like, how do we connect with each other in a world that's constantly trying to pull us apart? How do we find meaning when everything feels meaningless? These are questions every generation asks, and I think that's why No Longer Human is still so relevant.
Well, that's a great place to leave it, I think. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into No Longer Human. Hope you found it interesting, maybe even made you think a little bit. Until next time, happy reading.